Good afternoon, learners. I hope you can hear me. So today's lesson is obviously, by the way, just to introduce myself, I'm Mr. Al Naika, for those who weren't here yesterday. And obviously, the topic that we will talk about today is arrays. That was the request that you learners made yesterday. So we're going to start with arrays. Hopefully it goes well. And if there's any questions, just to go over the procedure, you just can communicate with me via the group chat. Now, learners, again, it's obviously, please let's just be respectful when we're communicating through that chat. And yeah, okay, so just moving on to through the slides. I'm sure I'm just sharing my screen with you, so you should be able to see this. Okay, so at the end of this lesson, what are the objectives? The objective is to be able to define an array, understand the need for it, be able to declare an array, the working principle of an array, and hopefully, if we have enough time, populating of an array. Okay, as I said, this is term 2 and 3 work in the CAPS document, so we will get started with it. We will take it easy, so please don't think that we're going to rush through this. So, what is an array? Now, for those who were here yesterday, obviously we need to understand the purpose of using an array. Okay, so firstly, it goes, in order for us to explain what an array is, let's first start off with explaining what a variable is. Now that is so simple. Obviously you guys are in grade 11, so this should be really simple for you to define. You would agree that a variable is able to store a single value at a time. Okay, again, you'd agree that a variable is able to store a single value at a time. Okay, and it goes on and says, what happens if we have multiple values? Okay, an array is therefore a data structure. Please take note of these terms, because when you get to your PAT, they will use terms like data structures, etc. So don't say we don't know what a data structure is. It's nothing more than an array. Obviously, there's other types of data structures as well, but we're just going to look at an array for now. Okay, that is used to store. So again, what is a variable? A variable is obviously used to store a single value. And the question then comes about, what happens if we need to store multiple values at any moment in time? That is obviously when we would use an array. It is a type of data structure that is used to store one or more values of the same data type. So again, emphasis is on the term data structure, the term one or more values, and please take note, it has to be of the same data type. Okay, so before we move on, what did the slide just talk to us about? It's obviously ensuring that we are able to store multiple values, because that's not what a variable can allow us to do. Okay, so just to like break it down further, what are 3 pointers, or what are 3 things that we can understand from an array without even looking at it? It's storing more than one value. Okay, understand the purpose of it. It is a data structure. And finally, for us to note that it has to be of the same data type. Okay, storing more than one value, it is a data structure, and it has to be of the same data type. Okay, so let's demonstrate the need for it. So we're first going to look at an example, okay, a really simple example. If you were with me yesterday, we spoke about while loops, but again, it seemed like you guys were really confident in that, but we'll obviously go ahead. So let's look at this example now, just to explain to you the need of this. Create a project called input numbers. It should allow the user to input 6 numbers using a loop. Find the sum of the numbers. Now, again, notice the question. It says, create a project called input numbers. And guys, you're welcome to work with me. So get your pen or get your paper out, etc. And get your pen, get your paper out, etc. And please just do this together, so that we can obviously try to cover as much of it as possible. Okay, so let's just get back to the example. So create a project called input numbers. It's a really simple interface, but we're going to do this together. Okay, Notice the question, and again, take this question down if you need to. It should allow the user to input 6 numbers using a loop, find the sum of the numbers. Okay, so we're going to look at the sharing my Delphi screen with you guys, so we can do that. Okay, I'm going to share with you my Delphi screen. Okay, so you can see the Delphi screen that is over here, and I'm just going to bring that to this side. So let's do this. Let's do this code together. Okay, so really simple for those of you who are but unfamiliar with programming. Let's do this together. So the first thing we're going to do is obviously have a variable, and we're going to have I because that is going to be used for our loop. Now remember, Delphi, you don't have to declare the variable for a loop. It does it for you. So I'm just gonna continue for. Remember, we use the auto prediction tab or whatever for it to give us this type of indication of how the for loop works. Now we said we're going to allow the user to type in 6 values. So notice the for loop is starting off at 1 to 6. Okay, really simple. I hope there was no queries with that. Again, if there's any queries, you're welcome to chat with me over here and I would answer your questions. So again, they said use a loop to allow the user to input 6 values, find the sum of those numbers. Now, I'm going to demonstrate something very important to you. Now, remember yesterday when we spoke about looping structures, we said that the perfect component for loops is obviously an input box. Okay, why is it an input box? Because, I mean, it's obviously the suitable component, because with the while loop, you don't know how many times you are going to request the user to loop something or request the amount of times for repetition. So that is why the input box is the perfect component when working with the loops. Okay, so just to recap from it, remember again from yesterday, everything comes in as a string, so therefore it is string to int. Okay, so I hope that is clear. Learners seem to still forget that string to int because everything comes in as a string, and we obviously convert it when we want to do mathematical calculations, etc. with it. So I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to do the input into this, or the code for the input box. I'm going to say enter a number, okay, comma, and that. Okay, I hope that is okay. I'm missing out a bracket over there. I hope that is really simple for you guys to understand. I'm just getting an input box to do that, and it said find the sum. Okay. Now, this is for those learners who are having issues with looping. I'm going to create a variable. I can do it over here. I'm going to create a variable called isum. Okay, and I'm going to obviously start with finding the sum. Okay, now because we're working with a loop, we want to, I wouldn't say, we want to be able to find the sum of these numbers. And how would we define sum? You would agree that in order for you to find the sum, it's obviously the addition of 2 or more numbers. Agree with me? In order for you to find the sum of something, it is obviously the addition of 2 or more numbers. But then you're probably wondering to yourself, if he's finding the sum of the first, okay, let's say the loop runs the first time. And when the loop ran the first time, I is equal to 1, agree? And you said I number. How do we find the sum of a single number? Obviously, we can't do that. So that is why we are trying to trick the computer into assuming that it has 2 values to work with. I will repeat that. We need to trick the computer into thinking it has 2 values to work with. And how do we do that? We create this variable called sum, and notice I set the sum to 0. By setting the sum to 0, notice what I'm doing now. I'm saying isum is equal to isum plus I number. Can you see how we did that? We obviously made it seem like we are adding 2 numbers, but obviously if we add something to 0, it is going to be the same number. So let's say, for instance, we go ahead and let's say the user decides to input a number and the user inputs 50. The first time the program is run, 50 plus 0 is not going to change the output or the effect of the output of the answer. So that is why we made sum 0. I'm going to put a comment over there. So please take note of the ISUM, and please take note of how the sum is found. Now again, by looking at the chat, I see there's no questions. So I'm assuming that this is really simple for you to understand. Okay, so input box allows the user to input a number, and obviously you find the sum. Now in our example, we chose a memo component to display our result. So I'm going to go back in over there, and I'm going to come and display my results. I'm going to do it within the, I'm going to come out of the loop rather and do it, because you don't want to be displaying the sum each and every time. You want to display the sum at once. So again, guys, for those of you who are hoping that we do something a bit more basic today, I think for loops are really basic. So I'm hoping that you obviously got something to take from that. Again, take note of where, I'm going to put a comment over here again. I'm going to say, take note that the output is done out of the loop. That the output is done out of the for loop. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and say into string, and obviously I'm going to display ISUM. Okay, so mem output dot lines dot add, and obviously you want to say ISUM, mem out, you want to do that. Now, I hope the code was quite simple for you guys to understand, but we're going to just have a look at that, take a moment to understand it, and please, if there's any questions that you have, please feel free to put it into the comment section and we can address it. So please have a look at that, and please just note how certain things are done. Okay, so we're just going to look at how this would look. Okay, and I want you to, I'm going to share with you my executions, the program or the form being executed. Okay, so I'm going to just share that with you. So we're going to see how that works. Okay, so enter values. Let's go ahead. We're obviously going to do it 6 times. So let's say 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60. So obviously that sum was 210. Take note though, take note of certain things that we did over here. You can obviously see that you displayed the sum once. You didn't display the sum 6 different times, because by placing the result or placing the variable of this or placing the output out of the loop, you were able to display the sum at once. Okay, so please take note of that. And obviously that was a really simple example. But you're probably wondering, but why do that example when it doesn't show us what the purpose of loops are? Okay, so obviously we want to go ahead and talk about the use of loops. So we're going to go back to this example, and I want to show you something, because some of you are asking the question, what will we be learning at the end of these slides? And we would be learning how to define a one-dimensional array, and obviously be able to describe the working principle behind that. Okay, so again, it is an introduction to arrays, so we're not going to take it, or we're not going to assume that learners know what an array is. So please just bear with us over there. So I want you to note something though. Okay, I want you to take note of this. The first time the loop ran, would you agree with me that it was really simple for us to see that the user enters a number? Okay, when the user enters a number, obviously that number would have been, let's say the user enters 1. Okay, when the user enters, let's say the user, first time the loop ran, the loop is obviously 1. Let's allow the user to enter a value, and let's say the user enters 50, okay? So obviously the 50 is equal to 50 plus, isum is equal to 50 plus number. When the loop goes the second time, the user gets to input a value. Now, this is what I'm trying to demonstrate. I'm trying to demonstrate the fact that obviously that the user, we are losing the previous occurrence of the value. So when the loop goes the second time, the user enters 80, for instance. And when the user enters 80, for instance, can you see that the previous number is replaced? Now that is not on, okay? That is not what happens if we need to store these values, okay? What happens if we need the third value or the fifth value? So it is not going to allow us to keep track of every number that is stored. So that is why we obviously have an array. Okay, an array is obviously going to allow us to store multiple values. So I hope you saw the need of it, and I hope you saw the fact that you won't be able to store multiple values at this using a loop. Okay, someone mentioned that. So is the loop called an array? No, Pramit, the loop is not called an array, and that is what I tried to demonstrate. Yes, and a loop is used with an array, but using it the way I showed you now is going to replace the previous occurrence of the number. I will repeat that. Using it the way you see it on your screen now is going to replace the previous occurrence of the number. We are not going to maintain storage of all the values. The moment we move on to the loop moves on to the next number, we are going to lose the previous value. So please note that the way that it's done now is not going to store all values. It is still a normal variable. And remember, when we started this lesson, we said that an array can only store one value. Okay, I'm going to share with you the PowerPoint again, and let's see if we can move on. So we said, let's see what happens below. We said, create a project called input numbers. It allows the user to input 6 numbers using the loop, find the sum of the numbers. Okay, so everyone is happy that this wasn't the best way to describe the use of arrays, or it actually demonstrated to you that we weren't able to store all the values. Okay, so what would happen if we needed only the second value? Okay, what would happen if we needed to arrange the numbers in ascending or descending order? How are we able to obviously keep track of those values? So notice that a variable, what are we trying to sum up over here? We're trying to say that a variable can only store one value at any moment in time, whereas an array can allow you to store multiple values. It goes ahead and says, how would you search for a particular value that was typed in? Okay, this is therefore the purpose of an array. Okay, as Marco asked, is there any way for us to get hold of the PowerPoints used in these lessons? Marco, it will be put on the YouTube channel for you to, obviously, on the African Geeks website, on the YouTube channel rather, for you to be able to see the slides again. So what is an array? As indicated in the start, it is used, or it is able to store multiple values at once. Okay, so are we all happy on what an array is and why we need it? I'm sorry if it seemed like we spent a bit too much time with it. So obviously, Pramit goes and asks, so would an array be able to store all 6 values? Yes, Pramit, that is what an array would do. It will be able to allow us to store all 6 values, and not as the case where we showed in the example, where we replaced the previous occurrence of the value. Okay, so yes, thank you for that. He summed it up quite nicely, or he did ask, so would an array store all 6 values? Yes. But how does it do it? That's the next question. Okay, really importantly, how does an array, or how is an array able to store multiple values? It does it simply, guys, by using positioning as a guide to store particular values. We'll look at this more in detail. So let's move on, okay? So Bertie goes and asks, why is the input box the best way when working with while loops? Because obviously we are not sure of the amount of times the user will require to run that program. So if he wants to run it 3 times, how do we cater for the perfect component in that sense? If the user wants to run it 5 times, how do we know exactly how many components to place in that instance? So in my opinion, the input box is going to be the best component for the user to input, because it's going to run depending on the amount of times that the user is wishing to run their code. So let's go ahead and let's read over here. It says, remember, an array can store information of the same data type. Okay, so please note that, guys, an array can only store information of the same data type. So for instance, as Pramit went ahead and asked, would it store all 6 values? Remember, it will store all 6 values provided that we were only working with numbers. So let's go ahead and continue reading. It says, an array can be used to store multiple string values. So again, what happens, then you can also use an array to store names of movies or names of people. But remember, it has to be all strings. Or an array can be used to store multiple integer values. Okay, or finally, an array can be used to store multiple real values. I'm sure you guys are getting the point of this. Okay, so again, string values only, integer values only, and real values. So we're going to start off today and say declaring an array. Okay, let's assume we want to store 5 names. Now I know some of you might say, but why don't we just use 5 different variables to store those 5 names? Why don't we just say sname1, sname2, sname3, sname4, and sname5? Well, that would work, guys. But remember, we are looking at this in a larger context. Okay, what happens if you want to store 100 names? What happens if you want to store 1,000 names? So do you see the purpose of an array? Okay, and do you see why the variable is limited in storing, is obviously limited in that sense? So please note that we are using an array, and obviously it is using positioning as a guide to store multiple values. So we go ahead and talk about the naming convention of an array. By using the letters A, R, R, now this is only a suggestion, learners. Remember, if you want to go ahead and not use it, you're welcome to. But remember, it's just like when you learned in grade 10. If you want to use an integer variable, you have to say I num. If you want to store a string value, for instance, you will use the naming convention of saying S name, S make, or whatever it is. But remember, you weren't restricted to that, if that's the proper terms to use. You weren't restricted to it. You could call it whatever you want, but obviously you want to use proper naming conventions, because it does help to read your program and to fault find much easier. So again, by using the letters A, R, R when making an array, it makes it much easier to distinguish between an array and a normal variable. Example, how would this array look if we had to create something? I array numbers, okay, because it's obviously integer values that we are using to store integer values that will be stored in this array. And notice that I said I array because ARR, because it helps us to note that that's an array. And notice we said that an array is not only limited to numbers. You can use an array with string values, which is over here. So S array movie names, okay, which is string values. And then obviously real values as well. R array price, and obviously those are real or decimal values. Okay, so just a quick recap from the top before we move on. We spoke about the need for an array. We spoke about a variable, or we should be able to distinguish between a variable and an array. By now, it should be really clear to you that a variable can only store one value at a time, whereas an array can store multiple values. Okay, so please note that an array can store multiple values, whereas a variable can only store a single value. We spoke about the purpose of a for loop, and it has learners chatted to me in the group chat. Obviously, you would note that it doesn't make it an array if you're just using a for loop. Please note that it is not an array if you're using just a for loop. Okay, yes, for loop is one of the things that we would use in the array, but it doesn't mean by simply using the for loop that it is an array. Remember, we went ahead and we looked at that example, and we spoke, and we obviously, that example was just the general use of a for loop. It did not include arrays. And what did the example show us? The example showed us that we were replacing the previous value each time the loop incremented. Okay, the example showed us that we were replacing the value that each time, or replacing the variable with a new value each time the loop incremented. Okay, so then we went ahead and we spoke about being able to declare an array. And remember, an array can store integer, an array can store string, an array can store real values. But finally, before we move on, take note that an array we must only use those type of values in array. Okay, we can't mix strings with integers in a particular array. If we're using integers, the array must be primarily used only for integer values. If we're using strings, the array must be declared such that only strings will be entered. And if you're using reals, the array must be declared such that only real values will be entered. Okay, I'm hoping that we are obviously on track so far. So let's move ahead. This is what you guys came here for. So what does an array declaration look like? Okay, remember, arrays are declared globally. Okay, we'll get to an example, we'll look at it soon, but remember, an array is declared globally. Okay, that's really important for us to note that an array is declared globally. Why would you declare globally? Because by declaring it globally, and I don't know if you noticed this, but the purpose of global and local variables. Now, again, just to recap or jog your memory from grade 10, the purpose of local variables was just so that the button could use that information. Now, if you wanted the entire program or the entire form to use the information, you would obviously declare the variable globally so that all the buttons can have access to it, okay? So again, just to recap, the purpose of local variables is so that only that button can have access to that information. And the purpose of global variables, or the purpose of declaring variables globally, is so that the entire form can have access to that information. I hope that was clear enough. Okay, so we declare our variables globally. Okay, S array names, colon array 1 to 4 of string. Lewis asks, is that the code for it? Yes, Lewis, this is a template, or this is the syntax of how an array should look like. Okay, so we're going to try this example, really simple. S array names, colon array 1 to 4 of string. Now we will get a chance to type it out, but let's understand exactly what each part in this declaration look like. So S array names, if you're looking at your screen, this is the name of the array. Just like a variable, you can call it whatever you like. Okay, so this is something that I know learners are going to mess up with. Okay, there is no equal to. Okay, please, I just want to tell this, and Lewis asks, mustn't there be an equal to? No, Lewis, when you are declaring an array, there is no equal to. Okay, take note of the colon. It is only a colon. There is no equal to. We are not assigning values to it. Okay, and then we move on to the bottom, and take note again, because it's an array, and this is what you would get used to understanding, that because you're using an array, now you're probably saying to yourself, but other than ARR, how else is an array different? Okay, other than ARR, how else is an array different? Okay, so obviously it is different, because when you're using an array, I'm just telling you this at the outset, and we'll look at this, it has to be used with square brackets. Okay, we will talk about declaring for today, and maybe tomorrow we'll look at an actual example of how to use an array. So this is the size of the array. Okay, notice the 2 dots, guys. Notice the 2 dots. You can't say, no, I want to put 1 dot, or I want to put 3 dots. You have to use the 2 dots to indicate the size, or to indicate the value after that. So what is the size of this array, or how many values? Yes, it's the same time tomorrow. So how many values TJ asked how many slides are left. TJ, we just have a few more to go through, and I want to just show you some examples as well. So just work with me, okay? So notice that the size of this array, or how many values can this array store? By looking at it, you can see that this array will store 4 values, okay? And finally, of string. Now, this is 2 different words, okay? Please don't type this as one word. The of is a reserved word, which means that you have to put that word over there, okay? It has to be used when declaring an array. And finally, note the data type, okay? Because you're working with names, which is a string, so I'm going to keep it as a string data type. Just a quick recap, take note of the naming convention of an array. The colon, please, it is no equal to over there. Take note, because it's an array, you have to state the structure of it. I think I forgot to include that in the table. So please note that you have to state the word array. That is obviously to say that you are using this type of data structure, okay? Because it is an array that you're working with, learners, you have to get used to the fact that because it's an array, it is not a variable. And how does it differ from a variable? Because it stores multiple values. How does it store multiple values? It uses positioning as a guide. And we'll look at that. I know there's probably a lot of unanswered questions that you probably have. Just bear with us for now. So we go ahead and say 1, 2, 4. Now, the easy way to remember this is, I usually say this in class. Think of this. 1, what's the size of the array? 1, 2, 4. That gives you an idea of how many dots to put, okay? 1, 2, 4. Please, it is, again, it's only a suggestion. It's just to build up the confidence, and give it a week or give it a day even, and you guys would obviously be masters at declaring an array. Finally, take note of the of and the string. So I'm hoping that this is really clear, and we're obviously going to just look at this in terms of how to declare an array in actual Delphi. Okay, so let's go to Delphi, and you can obviously see the screen that is over there. Now I'm going to just create a new project for now. Okay, let's not save that. And I'm just going to go to the code part. Now, we're not going to worry about doing any code, but I'm going to show you where arrays are declared. Now, learners, take note of this. This area over here where it has the word var. Remember, these are the basics, okay? But it's good as we get to the section that I get to cover some basic principles as we get to the more advanced topics, okay? This is where global variables are declared, okay? This is where global variables are declared, okay? I'm going to put a comment over there so you can note that when you're doing this. Global declaration. Now, this is not only for an array. This is for anything that you want to declare globally. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and going to create this array for myself. And I'm going to say S array names. And I'm going to say colon array. And I'm going to say 1, 2, 6 of string. Okay, did you take note of that? Please just take a moment to look at this and understand it. And please, if there's any questions, please feel free to answer that and note that. Again, Lewis, if you do put an equal to sign here, it's obviously you're going to, and this is what I noticed, guys. It's not, you know, there's always a question that you want to ask, and there's no such thing as a question being, it's not a good question. Okay, because remember, it is good to clear up the basics, because learners tend to learn the code so well, but when it comes to the paper, it's the simple syntax that they fail to remember. Okay, and you can imagine, that obviously you don't want to waste time like this. So Brownman asked, could it not also be declared under private? You can do it under private, but you obviously I mean, it's going to be, you're going to be limited in your use of it. Okay, so again, I would advise using it globally. So SRA names colon 1 to 6 of string. So I hope that was quite clear for you so why is global better? Because global allows the entire form to have access to your entire form to have access to that variable. Okay, and someone asked, why can it, and I knew this was going to come, why could it not be done under public declarations? Guys, that is fine as well. It doesn't make a difference. I think it's just when it comes to grade 10, you know, you usually want to type the word var out. So I usually think that I think that it's much easier for us. It helps learners in grade 10 to see that, okay, the word is already typed for me, so obviously it's an easier place for me to put it. But again, it doesn't limit you to put it from in public declaration. It works just as well. TJ asked a question about that. I'm not really going to answer that now, TJ, because obviously with time constraints, but we're going to go ahead. Okay, now let's say, for instance, we want to go back to our slide, okay, and I want to show you something again. And okay, and we say, we're obviously moving ahead now. Now this is how the array will do it, okay? This is how the array will do it. Let's say, for instance, we want to store the values Tom, Peter, Paul, and Sally, okay? So by using array names at position 1 will be Tom. Array names at position 2 will be Peter. Array names at position 3 will be Paul, and array names Sally will be stored at array names position 4. Now remember, in grade 10, you learned that a variable is basically a container used to store information. So therefore an array will have multiple containers. Can we see that? Therefore we can see that, so can we see that we have multiple multiple positions to store this value in the array. So again, that's really simple. Now, the size of the array indicates the amount of values that you wish to store. Okay, this is how we extract values at a particular position. Array names. And notice, because it's an array, guys, we use it with square brackets, not round brackets, not curly brackets, square brackets. Okay, remember that an array is obviously used with square brackets, and we indicate the number. Obviously, that's array names at position 1. And what is stored at array names at position 1? Obviously, we can see that Tom is stored at array names position 1. What is stored at array names position 2? We can see that Peter is stored at array names position 2. What is stored at array names position 3? We can obviously see that Paul is stored there, and array names position 4. We can see that Sally is stored over there. So just to recap what we spoke about in the second part of this lesson, we spoke about being able to look at how to declare an array. You should know what each part in that array means, or what each part in the declaration means. You should take note of where an array is declared globally, okay, obviously in that area, and you should take note of how an array is achieving this. Remember, it is not the same as a variable. An array is different because it stores, and you're probably saying, this guy is going on and on about storing multiple values, but that is essentially what an array is. It is able to store multiple values using positioning as a guide. Okay, so we're just going to finish off for today. We're obviously going to do a quick sum up of this. We're obviously going to try this. Declare an array to store 10 integer numbers. Now let's try to do that quickly. Okay, so we're going to go there and we're going to say, let's do everything in the same form. Okay, declare an array to store 10 integer values. Now by convention, I will obviously I will obviously use this. So that should be clear for you guys. So let's declare an array to store 10 integer numbers using declare an array to store 10 integer numbers. So let's just go there quickly and let's say share screen, and let's share this thing over here. So you should see that we have I array numbers. Let's just call it I array numbers, okay? And we're going to say colon array. It said 10, so I'm going to keep it as 10. Notice the 2 dots, and obviously it is of an integer data type. Okay, really simple. Let's go look at what the second question required us to do. We're going to go back to the PowerPoint. Notice this. It said, and look at how the different types of questions gets asked, okay? Notice how this question says. It says, declare an array to store 10, or declare an array to store the names of 7 subjects. Okay, declare an array to store the names of 7 subjects. So notice the different scenarios that this question can be posed to you. So nothing complicated. We want to store the names of 7 subjects. So it's obviously strings, agree. So S array subject names. Can you see? You can call it whatever you want. So I'm going to say array because that's the data structure that I'm working with. And notice 7. I mean, you can call it, you can have whatever size that you have, that you want. Okay, I have about 9 minutes to go, so I'm going to try to just finish this off, and then we obviously can sum up for today's lesson. So that's obviously a string. Okay, we're going to go ahead and we're going to remember, guys, it's not about covering a whole lot. It's about covering the basics, and it's about quality that you need to take from this. Now, notice the third thing over there. It says declare an array to store the prices of 15 items. Now, would you agree with me that prices are obviously going to have decimals in it? Now, because it may have decimals, we're not saying that it will, but we need to cater for all scenarios. So I'm going to use a real array over there, or a real data type. So R array prices, colon array 1 to, what was it? 50. It was 50. No, it was 15 items. Okay, so 1 to 15, really simple. Off real. Okay, we move ahead and let's just do the last 2 so we can tie up for today. I'm going to go ahead and say the last 2 was, which was too fast to declare an array to store the marks of 50 learners. Now we're going to assume that the marks are integers. We're not going to worry about the fact that there's decimals or whatever. We're going to assume that the learner has a whole number mark. So I'm going to go again and I'm going to share this with you guys. And obviously let's make it I array marks. Okay, it's an array. So obviously we are catering for, and notice this is the true purpose of an array, because this was for us to store the marks of 15 learners. Okay, this was the mark for us to store. This was for us to have 15 learners. Okay, so we're going to say 1 to 50. Okay, 50 learners, and it's obviously integers that we're working with. So that is what we're working with. And finally, for the last part for today, it said declare an array to store 88 movie names. Now, obviously, it's movie names. It's going to be a string. So it's going to be really simple for you to state that. So you're obviously going to go back to the declaration. We're going to say S array movie names, colon array, and we said 88. What I'm trying to demonstrate to you that there's no such thing as fixed sizes. Okay, does char work with arrays? Yes, perfectly, it works well with arrays. And will we work on arrays tomorrow again? Yes, guys, it's going to be for some time now that we're going to try to finish off arrays. So yes, it's going to get more detailed tomorrow. So please join me. So yeah, so that's obviously S array movie names is obviously how that would have been done. Now let's just go ahead and finally go and do the summary of this lesson. Okay, so what can we take away from this lesson? Okay, Lewis, we would look at it tomorrow when we run it. Okay, so be able to define an array. Okay, you guys know, be able to define a variable. I'm sure you guys know what a variable is now. Be able to define an array. I'm sure that everyone knows what an array is now. Can you distinguish between a variable and an array? That's what you need to ask yourself by the end of this lesson. And remember, learners, it's not about looking in a textbook and memorizing those words over there. It's about understanding it, what it means to you. So why the use of only a for loop and a variable is insufficient? So please note that someone asked, is an array a for loop? It is not only a for loop, okay? It is not only used with a for loop. That is just one of the things that we use in an array. So please note, by using a for loop, it does not mean that it is an array. Note the different data types for arrays. And finally, you should note how a trace table works. Okay, so I hope this lesson was informative. Remember, learners, it was an introduction to arrays. And remember, you can't go to the much more detailed stuff if you don't understand the basic principles or the basic or why do we need arrays? You need to know the purpose of it. And hopefully by the end of this lesson, you saw the purpose of arrays. Okay, that is it for today. Please join me tomorrow again at the same time. You can view the videos on YouTube using African Teen Geeks or searching for African Teen Geeks. I hope it was informative, and yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.